So we're sitting here, Jamie, to talk about the onboarding process from the time a client would reach out to us as the wealth manager, to onboarding as a bank, to funding the account and having the initial investment meeting. We want to give a picture to the listeners or the viewers to see, okay, what does that process look like? Especially we're going to be talking from our standpoint as WHVP. So maybe we could walk them through how that looks like initially. And obviously, you're most likely going to be the person that they're talking to initially when they contact us.
Yeah, that's correct. So I think it makes sense to start off by saying we are an independent wealth manager. So we are not a bank. We are an SEC registered investment advisor who introduces the client to the bank that best fits their needs. And then we guide them through the process, as you mentioned. But the bank is going to keep the assets safe. And we are the main point of contact for communication and investing for the clients. So, as you have mentioned, for WHEP, I do most of those initial conversations. They usually take between 30 and 60 minutes, depending on how many questions the clients have. And the idea there is to figure out whether or not we would be a good fit. So it's always good for us to get a better understanding of where the client is at, why they reached out to us, what their worries are, what they're hoping to accomplish through an offshore bank account. And then at the same time, I'm obviously happy to tell them a little bit more about our firm and history, how we work. And then based on that conversation, it is fairly easy to determine whether or not we will be able to help them accomplish what they are looking to accomplish. And then if they do decide to move forward, I will send them an email with a list of documents that we need to get started. And those documents are called KYC, so Know Your Customer. Maybe you can share a little bit more about what that entails for the client.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Know Your Customer, Know Your Client documentation, the KYC, it's going to be an investor profile, which the client fills out, name, address, family situation, financial situation, investment appetite or approach or risk tolerance. And it allows us to get a picture of the client of who they are, what their financial situation is. I mean, along the call, but something in paper that we can refer back to when thinking about the client and building a portfolio. It's going to be a passport copy, which initially can be provided in scan, both investor profile and the passport copy. Eventually has to be given to us because of the cross-border. We have to identify the client. So it'll need to be notarized, eventually sent to us.
And the passport needs to be signed.
Correct.
Very important.
Very important that the passport needs to be
a
signed.
lot of passports that have not been signed, surprisingly.
Yeah.
So make sure that you signed it before you send the scan.
So it's the passport copy. Then they're going to need a CV. In Switzerland, when being presented to open a bank account, you present it not necessarily like a job interview, but they need to prove or have some sort of picture of who you are as a client. Again, know your client. So they want to see, how did you build your wealth? What was your career path? There could be a variety of reasons of where or how the wealth was raised, whether it be inheritance. Some of the documentation might change based on that, but they still want a resume. Even if you got an inheritance, they still want to know who you are and what you do as a person.
Because it's also helpful to know the level of education and like what your field of expertise is to determine what your level of knowledge is when it comes to financial investments.
Correct, yes. And then the final documentation, if it's a sole or joint account, is going to be a source of funds. So oftentimes, in a very simple case, this is going to be an old tax return from the previous year or maybe 2 previous years, or let's say you are a person who got paid out a huge bonus for whatever job that you did, the tax return of where those funds were generated. If it's just steady income that you've built over time, then just a year to build a picture to the bank of who you are. Now, if you open up an account that's going to be like in a trust or an LLC or an offshore trust or an individual retirement account, then there's going to be some more documentation needed about the structure itself. So that could be operating agreements for LLCs, for trusts, it's going to be the trust deed and trust certificate. So there's some more documentation case to case based on who's opening the account.
Yeah. And then with that information, we go to the bank. We work with several different banks in Switzerland and in Liechtenstein. Typically, I determine together with the client where they would be the best fit. We are quite stringent in terms of which banks we work together with. All of them are very safe and reputable. They all have a very high level of service, but there are certain nuances. One person fits better one bank or the other. That's something that's best determined in a personal conversation. And then the bank decides on a case-by-case basis whether they're going to onboard the client. So that differs a little bit from like the retail banking in the US. With offshore banking, the Swiss banks are really quite selective in who they onboard. Due to the relationships that we have built with the banks that we work together with, our clients typically are accepted. There might be cases where there's more follow-up questions, but that's also something that I can usually feel out in a first conversation. So things that could raise follow-up questions are lawsuits, pending divorces, just things like that. Sometimes also the source of funds, like if there's a more exotic way how the client generated the funds, for example, cryptocurrencies, things like that can lead to follow-up questions. But because we have been in business for a long time, we usually present cases with the bank that are being accepted.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point to bring up. And also to view when we present the case to the bank, we are not a middleman. We are the client's partner in presenting them to the bank. And so we go to bat for you as the client to present a case, to get all the information from you and build a picture to you to the bank where they're going to be likely to accept it. That's part of the case with less back and forth, trying to cut down that time of the back and forth of that process. Usually it goes very cleanly and forward very quickly. We've had almost zero cases, not totally zero, but very few cases where there's really too much back and forth in that initial process. And within a few days, 1 to 2, maybe 3, 4, depending on which bank we work with and their internal processes, we get the account opening set from the bank. With that set, we create a detailed instructions that we're going to pass that set on to you digitally so you can print it out at home, along with a few documents from our side that we need in terms of like the permanent or the portfolio management mandate, some data consent forms, investment strategy forms, and beneficial owner forms. The bank, the documents are straightforward. There's usually a lot. That's one thing in the process that clients need to understand. There is administration work to be done.
We try to make it as easy as possible for the client, though.
Correct. And I've sat down on calls with clients to walk them through the process. Some clients can just take the email and go with it. Other ones, we walk more hand in hand. We're going to bat for you on the bank's behalf, and we're there to partner with you to make that as easy as possible in the process. Now, I think what's very important is with offshore accounts, the workload is in the front. There is an initial hurdle to get it going in terms of the administration process of opening the bank account. Once that's opened, then the ball's on us to communicate with you, obviously, to build a portfolio, to manage the account, and that we do as a team, but also with you as the client. So essentially, when you get those bank account documents done and sent over to us, we present it back to the bank, and it takes between, I would say, 5 to 14 business days, usually for the account to go through the compliance checks at the bank and then be opened. So the whole account opening process, from contacting us, speaking to Jamie, providing the documents, to account opened, if you're a very responsive person, is going to be about 4 weeks for a simple account. Now with trusts, LLCs, might be a week or two longer in terms of getting the account open, but it's going to be straightforward. But there will be some navigational positions to make sure that you get over that hump. Once it's opened, we pass on the wire instructions, the bank account's opened, and we walk through with the client how they can send the funds over. We send the wire instructions. If the client needs help filling out their own international wire form from their bank or their domestic bank in the US, we help them, give them suggestions on where they should fill things in. Once the fund arrives in the account, then we set up an initial investment meeting where you sit down, as you mentioned. You go from Jamie to me, and then we have relationship managers. I'm a relationship manager, but we also have Urs Freihoff de Rose, who is one of our owners with you, the business partner, and Julia Fernandez. Then you're going to be given to one of the investment advisors, relationship managers, And they're going to have this initial investment meeting where they talk about the portfolio, they talk about the investments planned, and what the communication is going to be like back and forth moving forward.
Absolutely. And I think this last part about the personal relationship manager is essential to highlight. We really build tailor-made and individualized portfolios. So it is very important to us to have a close relationship with you, know what you're looking for in terms of time horizon, liquidity needs, risks, preferences, restrictions. And we're going to take all of that into account when building a portfolio that's going to suit your needs.